fourth archetype is that of the hunter-gatherer. The hunter-gatherer. Now we all know that we were hunter-gatherers for 90% of our existence on this planet, our species. So that means we've all got a lot of hunting-gathering energy inside of us, in our DNA, and in our morphic resonance, our memories. And I ask the question, what are we doing with it? Well, one of the books I draw on heavily in this chapter is that of a fellow named Diamond, who wrote that good book a year or two ago, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And Diamond lived for 30 years in New Guinea. And New Guinea is still peopled by a lot of hunter-gatherers. So he kind of lived among hunter-gatherers for 30 years. That's a long time. And one of the things he learned was this. He said, these people are so intelligent. He said, their children, I'm convinced, are brighter than any children in North America. For one thing, they're not watching TV. They're constantly following their curiosity. Constantly following their curiosity, exploring nature all around them. They go into a new village, the first thing they do is they learn every rock and every stone in the village. And they learn all about the plants in any new area they're in. They learn the poisonous plants, they learn the edible plants, and they learn the healing plants. And he said, it's just amazing. Their constant curiosity is being fed and it's being nourished and nurtured. Now, we shouldn't romanticize, of course, the hunter-gathering times. Many of the hunting-gathering tribes, not all, but many, and certainly many in New Guinea, were extremely violent and aggressive, and in fact were cannibals. They'd have wars and they would eat their foe, their victims. So here's the source of our aggression. It goes back a long way. We've been carrying it for a long way. Now, this friend I referred to earlier, the psychologist, says to me, you know, we shouldn't teach that human beings are just images and likenesses of God, he said. We should also remind ourselves that we're images and likenesses of the great apes. And the apes too, some of the ape tribes are very aggressive also and have wars. So it's in our blood, so it's a question of what do we do with it? And there are basically three things you can do, I think, with aggression. One is to sit on it and pretend it's not there. That's called passive-aggressive behavior. And I think a lot of religion, certainly Christianity with St. Augustine's blessing, because he said anger is a mortal sin, a lot of Christians are walking around as passive-aggressive people, creating a passive-aggressive society. I think that George Bush is a fine example. He's carried on this war all the time wrapped in pious language. That's passive-aggressive behavior, folks. And the aggression is there. It's in us, and we're capable of whipping it up and spending billions of dollars a year to whip it up, calling that our defense budget, when in fact it could be an offensive budget. So that's one thing you do with aggression. You pretend you don't have it. You're beyond it. You're so pious and holy, and it's not operating at all. Yeah, right, except for that knife in my back. Another thing you can do, of course, with aggression is just live out a life of violence. And that happens too, obviously. But the third thing we can do with aggression is to steer it. Meister Eckhart says that you should put on your passions a bridle of love. A bridle of love. What's a bridle? It's a steering instrument that you put on a horse so that the horse takes you where you want to go and you don't go just where it wants to go. So the bridle of passion, which includes our anger, our aggression, our moral outrage, this is a powerful source of energy. But it needs direction and it needs bridling. And that's the healthy thing to do. And one way to bridle aggression, of course, is with creativity. One of my favorite stories about aggression is Michelangelo. Few people know this story. It's worth hearing, though. When he was painting the Sistine Chapel, his first rendition, he had these naked men up there, and a crotchety old cardinal came in inside and said, "You can't have these men naked. This is where the Pope prays." Michelangelo said, get out of here, I'm the artist, you aren't. But the Pope went, or the Cardinal went to the Pope and got his ear, and the Pope sent the word back, you got to put loincloths on these men. Well, Michelangelo was very ticked off, but the Pope was paying his salary, so what could he do? Well, he thought about it, and then when it came time to paint hell, he put this cardinal in hell. Then the old crotchety cardinal comes in, and he sees it, and he freaks out, and he goes to the Pope and says, and now guess what he's done? He's put me in hell. And the Pope said, I'm sorry, he said, if he put you in purgatory, I might have been able to do something about it. Can't touch it. So today, 500 years later, you can go to the Sistine Chapel, you'll see this cardinal in hell. So who won that argument, you see? Michelangelo took his trade, his tools, and he worked his anger through, you see. And there's a tradition among the Inuit people in the North Pole that when they sense a war breaking out between two tribes, they hold a poetry contest. And they choose the best poet from each tribe, and a jury made up of both tribes, certain members of both tribes, and the poets go at it for a week. And when they're finished, the jury votes on the best poet, and that guy's tribe wins the war. It's all over. Which makes a lot of sense, you know. You don't want to have a war at the North Pole. You know, life is hard enough without bleeding in 20 degrees below zero weather. But again, that's what William James called the moral equivalent of war, you see. That we as a species are very capable of turning our aggression into playful directions. And that is where sport comes into. I think that sport carries as much archetypal energy in it because it is a way of dealing with aggression on within a parameter, you see. So 22 men going at it, 11 on a team, to get a ball through the other 11 guys to a goal line, that's really saying something very profound. It's speaking to the archetype of how we handle our aggression. Now, we can put too much projection into sport, of course, and spend too much time watching it. But I think it helps to point out what is the allurement there. And I just mentioned football, but you could say the same of everything. That sport is a way of taming our aggression, doing it within bounds, within rules. My father grew up in the south side of Chicago, an Irishman, when things were very rough in the Depression. And he was a very angry young man, and he played football. And at his funeral, his brother told me, my uncle, a story I'd never heard. He said, you know, your father was not just angry, he was also very smart, and he studied all the rules. And the rules in football in the 30s did not say anything about brass knuckles. So your father, the first play of the game, would go after the best player on the opposing team with brass knuckles. And, you know, he'd do it fair, he'd tackle him or hit him, but they won every game. And then they changed the rules. A year later, they changed the rules. But that's just an example of aggression getting tamed late in our sports. Another dimension to hunting-gathering times is that of ritual. So I draw from Barbara Ehrenreich's wonderful book on celebrations that came out a year ago. And she points out, yeah, it was this time that humans were so rich in creating rituals. I mean, consider Stonehenge. You know, here's Stonehenge, these 2,000-ton rocks that were dragged without wheels, before wheels. Why were they dragged? Who went to all this trouble? It was about ritual. It was about setting up a temple that was attuned to just what D.H. Lawrence is talking about, the equinox and the solstice, the moon and the sun, Father Sky. Bringing Father Sky in at appropriate times, and Mother Moon, appropriate times of the year, for the whole community to rejoice about, to start over about, to be re-energized. All ritual worthy of the name is macrocosm marrying microcosm. The sacred hoop of the universe connecting to the small hoops of the human communities, which are also sacred. That's where the energy comes from. And this was well known all around the globe in the time of the hunter-gatherer, which is why still today Native American practices are so powerful for so many of us, whether sweat lodges or vision quests or sun dances and so forth. Now, another issue in our hunting-gathering time is that of shame. What is shame? Shame is the feeling of not belonging. The feeling of not belonging. Now, in hunting-gathering times, as you know, there were no jails and there were no prisons. So how did they deal with their miscreants? They were evicted from the tribe. The worst thing that could happen to you was to be set adrift from the tribe. That's shame, not belonging. And you had to wander the rest of your days. So I think that this offers insight about the issues of shame. The shame is not belonging. And if you back up to our previous archetypes, see, if men do not feel that we belong to the universe, to Father Sky, then we're set up for shame. That's a very great non-belonging. It's a very great community to be cut off from. The same is true regarding the green man. If we have lost our community with the rest of nature, the plant world and the animal world, then again we're set up for shame. And let me say, I think of a lot of huckster religion has moved in to fill that gap and has been preaching shame and aggression, filling in those holes in the soul of both men and women. The shame of our bodies, shame of sexuality, the shame of being homosexual. The whole issue of, that's one reason, you know, that homosexuals and heterosexual men have different journeys. We're not different, but we have different journeys. The homosexual is subjected to shame much earlier than the heterosexual. And the result is one of two things, I think. The homosexual either falls into great depression and addiction, set up for addiction early, whether the addiction be drugs, alcohol, or sex, or the homosexual develops a spirituality much deeper and much sooner than the majority of men have to do, because they're not being so challenged by shame as boys and as teenagers. Hunting, gathering, what's next? Spiritual warriors. Now, our culture has mushed together warrior and soldier, soldier and warrior. Most journalists use the terms inadvertently, and that's simply wrong. I was really woken up to and alerted about the difference a few years ago. In our doctoral program, there was a Native American, and he told us this story. He said, I was in the Vietnam War, and when I came back, my elder said to me, you have been a soldier, now we're going to make you a warrior. I said, how long was the training? 4 years, he said. 4 years difference. 4 years of training difference between being a soldier and being a warrior. I said, what was the training like? Well, first they taught me to play the flute, he said. I mastered the flute, a wooden flute. And then one night they called the whole tribe together. It was like a recital. I played for the tribe. It was beautiful. I was great. At the end of the night, each elder came up with a knife and took a chunk out of the flute. At the end of the night, he said, I had no flute. I said, wow, that sounds like Meister Eckhart, who says, the soul grows by subtraction, not by addition. He said, what Indian said that? I said, this 14th century Dominican preacher heretic said that, my brother. Well, I said, I asked what Indian, because he said, every one of my trainings was like that. They taught me something and they took it away. They taught me something and took it away. Hafiz, the great 14th century Sufi mystic, has written the best about warriorhood, I think, of anyone that I've read. And he says this, he says, soldiers, you see, a soldier is given a very specific task. He's given a gun and told, kill or be killed. That's his task. It's a very narrow task. The warrior's different. So Hafiz says, soldiers are dying in excruciating pain. But you can become a warrior and ride through the world on a horse carrying your heart like a life-giving sun, S-U-N, but only if you and God become sweet lovers. That's the difference between a warrior and a soldier. The warrior has learned to love. The warrior is a mystic. He's not just a guy with an assignment. He's explored his capacity for love of life and for grief. Because with love comes grief. The Celts have a wonderful saying, never give a loaded gun to a young man who's not first learned to dance. See, that's the same thing. But until you've learned to celebrate life by dancing, you're in no place to be taking life. So Hafiz points out that part of the warrior's task is to deal with the ghosts of the past, he says, that come like hooves in the night to break the jewel of the heart. So we all have a jewel in our heart, and it is a warrior's task to protect that jewel. And sometimes the attacks come from the past, and sometimes they come from the future, and that's what fear is about. The ghosts of the future, he says, that want to barf all over the walls. The warrior stands firm in the now, as all mystics do, living in the now. As Jesus said, the kingdom and queen of God is here now. That's what makes you a mystic, to be firm now. You can deal with the future that's coming upon you, which may be full of fears. The fear is always about the future. And with the ghosts from the past. And then Hafiz says, sometimes God does us a great favor, turns us upside down, and shakes all the nonsense out. But most everyone I know, he said, when they hear God is in such a playful, drunken mood, quickly packs your bags and hightails it out of town. So in other words, chaos, folks. And we're in it now. The dark night of the soul. What the mystics call the dark night of the soul. We're all being turned upside down to shake all the nonsense out. And it's time for the warrior to stick around. Not run off to the next distraction. But to stick around to learn what there is to learn from the dark night of the soul. The chaos that we're in. I believe we should talk today about the dark night of our species, because I think that's what's going on. Profound changes. What is the essence of the dark night according to the mystics? The essence is, it is a purification of our longing. A purification of our longing. What's more valuable than that at this time in planetary and human history? We have to ask, what are we really longing for as a species? Is it more shopping malls? You know, what are we longing for as a species? It's a time for purification and for asking those radical questions. And then the turnaround begins. Because the via negativa and the dark night of the soul is the bottoming out that makes way for the creativa, the creative spirit that's going to shoot through. So those are a few words about the spiritual warrior. And we're all called, man and women, to be spiritual warriors. Now, I should move along swiftly, so I'm going to kind of jump swiftly over the next two, which are about masculine sexuality, numinous sexuality, and also the next one after that, our cosmic and animal bodies. Just to say a few words about both. There are cultures around the world that truly honor our sexuality as being integral to our spirituality. And of course, there are temples in India, and there are huts in Africa, in Muslim Africa, in fact, where the phallus is honored for the sacred energy that it represents. And of course, we forget this. But in our Bible, in the West, in the Jewish Bible, there is a whole book, the Song of Songs, that is in fact a celebration of sexual love as theophany, as an experience of the divine, as mysticism. The Song of Songs is about the redeeming of the Garden of Eden that happens when people make love. And now, unfortunately, a lot of the church's effort has been to clean that book up and to tell us, oh, it's not really about that. It's about God loving Jesus, or God loving the church, or Jesus loving your soul. But ask any Jew what it's about. That one of the Jewish traditions is that on the Sabbath you do two things. You make love and you read the Song of Songs. And they go along very well together. So what I'm saying is that there are traditions around the world that do not pit sexuality against spirituality, but realize their profound integration. One of the people I quote in this chapter, a Taoist master, says he's convinced, working in North America, though he's from Vietnam, but working a lot in North America, that far more men have mystical experiences making love than they do going to church. This might explain why some churchmen, I won't mention Cardinal Ratzinger by name, are so hyper interested in taming sexuality, you see, because they see it as a competition with their livelihood, which it may well be. But there has to be some reason why people like that are so preoccupied with sex, even in their 70s. Well, I shouldn't say with sex, with other people's sexual lives. It's more, let's be accurate. So then our cosmic and animal bodies. It is so important what we're learning from science today about our bodies. That our bodies are literally cosmic. Our bodies, 60% of them are over 13 billion years old. 60% of your body. Because the hydrogen atoms are 60% of your body, and they were cooked in the original fireball over 13 billion years ago. The rest of your atoms were cooked in the supernova 5.5 billion years ago. That's a new part of your body. So, you know, it's an amazing moment in human knowledge and wisdom to rediscover the wonders of our body and how special our bodies are. One of the books that was very important to me in my chapter in Father Sky is written by two scientists not so far from here at Santa Cruz, Joel Primick and Nancy Abrams, a husband-wife team. Their wonderful book, View from the Center of the Universe, a brilliant book about the latest news of cosmology we picked up from Hubble telescope the last 5 years. Joel Primick is a very renowned astrophysicist. He's with NASA. He was part of this team that put together the underground collider that just got kicked off in Switzerland and France this fall. He's top-notch. It's a wonderful book. And one of the points they make in the book is about how our bodies, contrary to what Bertrand Russell taught, Stephen Gould taught, and all modern science taught, we humans did not just happen on the scene. The truth is, the scene that we're in is absolutely special. The time at which we have arrived with these amazing bodies and minds is very special. For example, in terms of the history of the Earth is going to last 9 to 10 billion years, and it's now 4.5 billion. We've arrived halfway through the history of the Earth. In terms of the history of the universe, we can still see the unfolding of the universe in its horizon. But before too long, the universe is going to be over the horizon, and people won't be able to see it. We can see the whole thing. We can pick up the sound from the original fireball today, and we're examining the whole thing. We arrive at an amazing moment in the history of the universe. And then they talk about the size of our bodies. Our bodies are midway between the tiniest creatures in the universe and the vastest creatures in the universe. We're right in the middle. All these stories are Goldilocks stories, you know. This bed's too soft, this one's too hard, this one's just right. This porridge is too cold, this is too hot, this one's just right. We came along at just the right time with just the right bodies. They point out that if our bodies were much larger than they are, our brains would have to spend most of their time operating the body. But our bodies being the size they are, we have the time and energy to look out at the rest of the universe and figure out what it is we're here to praise. What it's all about. So it's story after story about the gift that our bodies are. And so for men and women, but I'm talking especially about men now, to become body conscious, not out of vanity, but out of appreciation. Exercise. Good exercise. Well, find your own. Not everyone has to go lifting weights and all that, but find what works for you. Maybe it's hiking, maybe it's swimming, maybe it's running, maybe it's weightlifting, whatever, but taking care of that body. It's the only one you're going to have that's like this. If you're into reincarnation, great, but you're never reincarnating into this body again. So you might as well take it for a ride while you got it. You know? And about food and the food we eat and the food we allow into our bodies. And once you begin to become conscious of that and resist the corporate toxing of our bodies with sugar and the rest, and then teach that to your children. Once we do that, we're going to be cutting way back on our medical expenses, and we're going to find a lot more to be delighted about. So the whole thing about caring for our bodies and reverencing them is so important.